So what's up guys, in this video I'm going to talk about optimal volume for overall training all your muscle groups. So that's pretty much going to be the topic of this video entirely. So I'm going to talk about optimal volume and training regarding that for all muscle groups. Anyways, let's begin. So optimal volume, what is it? Optimal volume is basically an optimal amount of sets and reps that you do for each muscle group to gain hypertrophy or strength effects, basically. Why do we need optimal volume? We need optimal volume obviously to program properly and to get sufficient gains in this case, or in pretty much hypertrophy or strength training. Now I think volume is more of a case for hypertrophy than it is and bodybuilding than it is for powerlifting, because the volume kind of, when we talk about volume we usually talk about bodybuilders more than strength type based lifters, though it does matter of course, like you have to do a specific amount of sets and reps still, but it varies obviously. So let's start with like strength, just to get it out of the way. So strength, for if we talk about optimal volume for people who are doing powerlifting and strength type training, you usually want to use a lower rep range, so usually between 1 and 5, and you're usually doing sets can vary from whatever you need, really 1 to 6 for example. And with powerlifting and strength you can kind of program in a different way. You can program both volume, high volume training and low volume training, because the thing is, as a powerlifter you still need to gain muscle to actually gain strength at the end of the day. Obviously powerlifting is more about improving the technique and focusing on the technique, that rather than just working on volume like bodybuilding and getting maximal amount of volume. Now as far as powerlifting goes, again it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve, and optimal volume for that is very individual because it's powerlifting training. It depends on what you want to achieve and what your program is like. I would not be able to tell you what you need exactly. I mean, it's the same for bodybuilding, but I can give more generalized advice for bodybuilding, I think, because it's easier, because it kind of works to an extent for everybody. But this was something I wanted to talk about, is optimal sets and reps is very individualistic, because there's different types of lifters. There's people who can take more volume and there's people who can take less volume, and then there's people in between. So there's some people that will grow on like 8 sets, like let's say of biceps a week will grow on that. Like let's take an intermediate lifter for example, will grow on, this person will grow on 8 sets a week of biceps isolation. And then let's take the other extreme, this guy only grows when he does 16 or 18 sets a week on biceps. So we have 2 different extremes genetically, and that's when it becomes very, very individualistic how much volume you exactly need for your training. And I think a lot of people give this advice of, oh, you should do between 8 to 12 sets. Like, it's a good generalized advice I suppose, but I would still take a look on your individual level, what you want to achieve and what you want to focus on, and how you want to distribute your volume and how you want to program your volume. It's very important to do that. Now I think most people can take the 8 to 12 sets for example to do for like a bicep isolation movement, but I think most people should take an approach of, once you, especially once you're in your intermediate to advanced stages, that's when you should take this advice of individualizing your things. So like personally for me, I do 16 sets of biceps right now, and that's quite a lot of volume per week on the higher end, definitely. I heard Jeffrey Verdishkovia does 18 sets a week, so that's something also. He has a lot of arm training videos as well, talking about volume and things like that. And again, he mentions the fact that there's different types of people and you need to individualistically kind of figure out what you need. You need to try things out, see how well you recover, see how well you respond to things over time with a proper bulk. You need to bulk properly, and do all the other things right before you can really say what works for you and what doesn't work for you in terms of volume. Now, generalized information is fine, like how many sets and reps you should do. I think it works great for beginners, less so for intermediates and advanced. That's when you start experimenting with your training and programming and start being more individualistic in what you do and what works for you, because not everything works for everybody. There's some generalized information that works, of course. Now, with optimal volume for all muscle groups, I would say anything between 8 and 16 sets is pretty good volume wise for every muscle group that you can have. Like any muscle group in your body, 8 to 16 sets is good, like between that range pretty much. If you go above 16, it's starting to be a bit extreme. If you can handle it, go for it. And anything lower than 8, I probably wouldn't recommend, because it's too low volume in my opinion. The lowest you should go is 8. That's my humble opinion. If you can grow on less, then maybe you're genetically blessed or something like that. So then you can do that. But that is my experience with volume and optimal volume, and how to use optimal volume and how you should use it to maximum benefit for yourself. I just wanted to bring my views on this topic, and I think there's a lot of misinformation if you go search like what is optimal volume for this bicep isolation. It's like, oh, do 8 to 12 sets a week, don't do above 12 sets a week, because you're gonna go catabolic or something. And I think that's dumb that it's people giving out advice like this, because I feel like people should give out more advice that is more individualistic to all people's needs. And that is something I want to touch on this video basically. That's pretty much the whole video. I mean, there's nothing. I just wanted to touch on optimal volume and how to use it and how I think about optimal volume, and perhaps you can start thinking about optimal volume in a different way now and apply this in your own training and programming. Is thinking and experimenting with your own program, seeing what works for you, and kind of opening your realm to accepting a higher end of the volume as well, not just the lower end. If you're maybe not, maybe you're lagging in some muscle group, try adding more volume slowly. See the results over time when you're bulking, and see what happens. I don't think this advice applies so much for cutting people. So if you're cutting, I don't think you should increase volume too much, because then you might not be able to recover and things like that. So you have to take into account what phase you're going through in your training when you're applying optimal volume for your situation. But obviously this is all about the topic, and I hope you enjoyed the video and got something out of it. Hope it opened your eyes a bit. Thank you for watching the video.